Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and joining me today is the writer of comics like Lazarus, Black Magic, and more. It's Greg Rucka. Thanks for coming on, Greg.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So, while you have a lot of different projects currently, including a new volume of Black Magic dropping and the upcoming Wonder Woman Black label book, I wanted to have you on to talk about Lazarus because of the changes it's going through. For listeners that don't know, Lazarus is a comic by you and Michael Lark and others about a future where traditional nations are gone and the world is now run by a group of families/corporations who have split up the world, with that predictably being an often tumultuous situation, which is why they're protectors and military leaders, the titular Lazarus of each family, with the Carlisle family and their Lazarus forever being the core focus. I know that's a terrible approximation of what the comic is all about, but it's now becoming something different slightly, at least from like a release strategy, and that's what I really want to talk about. Instead of the team killing themselves to try to fit a monthly-ish schedule, you're now going to release it quarterly, with each issue being 64 pages, with 44 of those pages being comic and the rest being back matter. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Why was that the schedule and format? Why was that schedule and format change necessary? Why did you guys need to do that?
It's mostly an attempt to make Michael Lark's life easier.
Right.
First and foremost, because he's drawn the book and he's been drawing it for a while and he's got a ways to go. And we have pretty much from the beginning been plagued with schedule problems. And trying to keep the book coming out monthly has led to dismal failure. And some, I think ultimately productive and useful attempts to solve it, by, we do the source books, we did the X66 mini.
Right.
But, the purpose of those titles has always been twofold. The first has been to do what they're doing, right, which is a source book to give a deep dive into Carlisle or Hawk or Vassalovka. X66 was very much done to fill in gaps in the story that weren't going to be able to be filled in the main story anyway, and had been an idea I'd been toying with for a long time. And then when Michael came to me and said, I need to take a break, I'm burnt out. I need about a year off. It was like, okay. In both cases, Sourcebook and X66, as I said, they've got a primary purpose, but their secondary purpose is to keep Lazarus on the stands in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
But when you're in an environment where you're constantly trying to negotiate that schedule,
mm-hmm.
The schedule problems have remained.
Mm-hmm.
So looking sort of in the aggregate at how Lazarus has run, right, which is arcs tend to be 5 to 6 issues. They were coming out maybe a completed arc once a year, and then you get a trade. Well, if you look at the math on that and you look at our formatting options, it kind of made sense to go, let's try quarterly.
Right.
Let's see what happens if we give ourselves 4 months, do a larger chunk of story, figure each arc will be the equivalent of 3 of those, and still be able to produce a trade once a year, and then give ourselves basically a 2-quarter window, right? To potentially to do the catch up in between. Well, and then ideally we'll be able to hit the dates that we want to hit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the primary, right? The primary here is let's see if we can't find finally a schedule we can meet.
Right.
We've got at this point a very loyal readership and a very invested readership. And I'm perhaps mistakenly, I'm not really concerned about them leaving. They've been incredibly patient so far, and most of the feedback we get is, no, I'll read it when it comes out. I got no problem with that. We also have a group of trade waiters,
Hmm.
We have worked from the beginning to make sure that the floppies have their own value. And going to a quarterly allows us to give them even more value. And that matters to me. This is not a goal to bump the price point, exorbitantly, and basically end up putting out just regular trades. I think the back matter, the back matter is part of our community,
Hmm.
uh, and it's not simply the letters as much as I think that ongoing dialogue and then what comes out of it. And there have been other ideas that I've toyed with. We've wanted to do short fiction,
Mm.
uh, but being able to do a short fiction anthology has been something that I have not been able to actually devote the time to. By moving to this format, we can add some short fiction,
Hmm.
which is very exciting. We can have some more fun with the artifacts. We've got Green Ronin is coming out with the Lazarus RPG, and we figure we can devote a couple pages to. In this story, here's an NPC or here's a piece of technology and convert it into the game mechanics.
Hmm.
So I think we can use it and let it be uh, a very a worthwhile buy. And
Yeah.
we're looking at a price point of about $5.99 or $6.99 for 64 pages, perfect bound right now.
Hmm.
Uh, which is right now a 32-page self-cover issue sells for $4.
Right.
So from a cost level, I actually think the reader gets more.
Right. Well, so wait, Perfect Bound, is that square bound?
Yeah.
Okay, that's why I thought. Yeah, I mean, first off, just because I'm a huge nerd, like Squarebound, like I have a lot of nostalgia for like the Prestige series that DC has done over the years,
Yeah,
and
I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so those Perfect Bound books, like that's I don't know why, like there's a huge amount of value to that. Like, have you been reading Batman Creature of the Night at all by chance?
I have not.
Okay, well, it's a great book, but the fact that it's actually a prestige book with a square bound, it's like basically the nostalgia, all the nostalgia inside me would like not allow me to not buy that book because of that. But I do want to say, like, this is just going to be a straight up compliment from the front, but it's like comics have a tendency of, especially creator-owned comics, they easily can run into scheduling problems, and that's a real thing. I think part of the problem that with comics is people forget about the or the human cost behind this stuff. That like when you guys are trying to churn out those books, like Michael's like perhaps almost literally killing himself between the physicality and the stress that goes into it, making that happen. And the one you can do one of two things. One, you can ignore it and you can just like not communicate with your audience, and two, you can be real about it and you can actually come up with solutions. And I feel like that's one thing I've really appreciated about the way you have all approached it, is that you've done the source books. You did X plus 66, which I thought was an excellent solution to the giving Michael some time and everything like that. And you came up with the quarterly. It's like you guys are coming up with new ways to approach it that's going to work best for yourselves, but also best for the readers. And like that's a really like narrow path to walk down. It's like it's a tightrope, and I think you guys are walking it pretty well. And I think that's part of the reason maybe why you found that your community of readers have responded well to it, is like you've been very communicative and you've been very forward thinking in your approach. I don't know.
Well, that's great to hear. I look, I want and and it's funny. I think I probably learned this lesson best. I knew it on some level, obviously, but I knew it best when we did the Kickstarter campaign several years ago,
For Lady
which is
Saber?
yeah, which is you've got to be as transparent as possible.
Right.
And look, books, all books self-select, right?
Right.
People will buy what they want. So people who are buying Lazarus at this point are buying it because they're invested, to one extent or another. It's only common courtesy to return that investment with honesty.
Mm-hmm. So when you were looking at the format change and you were trying to consider what you wanted to do, and you ended up with the source books, and you ended up with X plus 66, and you now are moving to a format change where you're going quarterly. Like, did you look at other comics in the marketplace and maybe what other people are doing, even in other industries, to try to find out, to figure out what would be the best answer, or did you like I don't know, just have to kind of come up with what you did?
Well, it was, if I remember correctly, it was Michael who suggested the format change initially.
Mm,
And I talked to Eric Stevenson about it, and he got fairly animated and excited at the potential. I
mm,
think it has been something that I think he was aware of in the larger marketplace, um, and so it wasn't a hard sell. I think, I mean, just for my purposes, I wasn't looking at it so much as what are other people doing, as
right,
much as I was really trying to figure out, look, how do we solve this problem? Because we have tried all these other things and they're still not working.
right.
And it may just simply be, look, that's the nature of the book, and we may not be able to do anything about it. But if this helps, then it's worth a try, and um, it gives us certain rewards in doing it. That makes it a worthwhile experiment
Hmm.
uh, for me. But it was never really an issue of uh, uh, X book is doing it like this, so we should try it.
Right.
As much as it was like, well, maybe this is a solution to our problem.
Hmm.
So,
At least like one thing I will say is like Image themselves are publishing a quarterly book in Headlopper, Andrew McLean's book, and I think that works for him because he's doing pretty much everything himself besides coloring, and and also it's like I think he's charging $5.99 for the book. It eventually gets collected into trade. It's kind of your playbook to a degree. He's kind of doing it in more like a season. He's going through seasons doing it. I don't know if you guys plan on doing that where you have kind of a break after you finish an arc or anything like that, but
I suspect we're gonna want to do that because I think once we get through this first arc, we will be able to reevaluate how the timing goes. But I'll tell you honestly, one of the things that's going on right now is I've got to figure out how to write for it,
right.
um, which is a very different process and is proving to be more challenging than I thought it would. Michael has, at this point, only 13 pages of issue 29. Um, Michael does a lot of pre-production before he actually begins drawing. So we're still in a reasonably good pre-production window, but it puts him in an uncomfortable place because he really wants to have the whole script before he gets to work. And right now, I just couldn't give it to him because I'm trying to figure out how do I pace this
Hmm.
for 44 when I've been pacing for basically 22, for the last 28 issues. And one of the other things, actually, I will say that we wanted to do with the format change was I wanted to give Michael more room to breathe.
Mm.
I'm a passionate, I'm greedy as hell about my page real estate.
Hmm.
I don't like splash pages. I loathe single image double page spreads. I think that you have to put that image has to be so crucial for the story to justify spending 2 pages on it,
Hmm.
that I almost never use it. I'll use a DPS layout for multiple panels, because I like the way we can play with that in storytelling, but I very rarely will offer up just a single splash. And if you go through Lazarus, I think there's only one DPS in the whole damn series at this point.
Yeah, I mean, one thing like it makes sense. Like the thing I'm excited about, at least for me as a reader, is like a lot of the moments that I really love in Lazarus are like the small moments. Like I love everything about it, but it's like people really underrate how good Michael is at character acting, and you like give him a lot of great moments for that. But if you're able to kind of slow the pace a bit, I think I've brought this up to both you and Michael like several times. There was this part way back in Lazarus #4 where oh my god, I completely forgot the name of the Lazarus that forever had basically a relationship with Joaquin Moret.
Joaquin.
Yeah. Anyways, like where he's like looking away from her because he's embarrassed because his like kind of cyborg side is showing because he's been torn up in this fight. And it's just like this really nice, subtle 3-panel like sequence where he's looking away from her, and then she's still staring at him, and he realizes that, so he looks back at her, and it's like there's so much meaning in like the character action there, and like having that kind of space to do that makes the book so much better. And it sounds like that will be a nice thing for you. Although, you know, it's funny because I feel like to a certain degree, like some readers will be like, well, it's just basically Greg stacking 2 scripts together. How difficult could that be?
Yeah, no, one of the greatest things about working with Michael is he is without doubt. Nicola does this as well in Black Magic, which I think gives you an idea of you know why I work with the people I'm working with. Mm-hmm. But you know, Michael's storytelling, and in particular his ability to capture subtlety.
Yes.
I live or die on that. I have worked with artists who get wildly uncomfortable when you ask them for a subtle moment. And, you know, Nicola trained as an actress, so a lot of the performance you get in Black Magic is very much her performance, right? But I think Michael is much more a student of human nature and a devout people watcher. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, look, I would die if he wasn't capable of hitting those moments.
Right.
And so, like I say, that's one of the reasons why trying to give him, you know, we're going to go 44 pages. I'm going to script for 40, so that he knows he's got room.
Right.
And so he can play with it. And that means that, sure, if he wants to try a DPS, he's got the 2 pages to do it with. Mm-hmm. But it's more because as he and I have worked together, we, I think, know one another's rhythms, and I know and absolutely trust his ability to take what I'm scripting and the intent of it and draw it out of my tortured scripting prose.
Right.
So look, I mean, he's a wonderful visual storyteller. Mm-hmm. And I would be an idiot not to take advantage of that.
That's why I think that one of the most underrated parts about comics, like one of the things that is really underrated in what you can give like creative teams and everything, is continuity, like the ability to have a team together for a while, because then you start figuring these things out, and then you have teams where you know what Michael's strengths are, so you can give him the space to embrace those strengths. And that's how something like Lazarus, which is a great book, or Black Magic, which is a great book, can happen, is like those people are, you trust each other to do the best with what you give each other. And I think that's like where the magic of comics happens, really.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, and I think that at this level we've got, I would hope, some established trust, not just with the audience but with each other. You know? Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's like part of like I talked to. Do you know Joe Field, the comic retailer? From
I know I've met him.
Oh, okay. So he was on the podcast a little while ago, and we were talking about Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, and it's just like they've worked together for so long that it's just like, I don't know. I mean, it's like it's just such a well-oiled machine, but
Yeah.
they still can consistently surprise you. And like that's one thing I'm excited about, seeing how the format change will impact you guys, is like now you guys have kind of a new beast to play with. And once you kind of figure out the pacing and the scripts and Michael starts figuring out how he wants to approach it, I think some cool new things could come out of it creatively. I want to talk about some nitty gritty stuff, just because there's like some things that I actually I open up. I have on my Patreon. I open up some questions for people, and there was a fair amount of questions
You
about.
actually got some. I was
Yeah,
curious.
yeah, yeah. No. They emailed me, and like there was a lot of questions about like kind of like the nitty gritty stuff. Like first off, I think you said this in the back of the letters column or the back matter. You are keeping the same numbering, right?
Yes, we are not changing it. I think that would just be silly,
Okay.
and unkind. Issue 29 is the first quarterly issue, but it is issue 29.
As a person who still has long boxes that are organized, the constant renumbering is something that makes my life a nightmare. So I appreciate it.
It's funny because we've had moments where there were some logical places we could have, if we had wanted to, quote unquote, relaunch, renumber and relaunch the series, we could have done it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's gamesmanship. That's all it is. And I don't see any reason to, again, it goes to that issue of transparency and trusting your audience and wanting to return that trust. It may not be a huge thing, but I kind of feel like if we did bork the numbering, that would be kind of abusing our audience.
Right.
I mean, for some people, they wouldn't care, but there are people who would care. And it seems, to me, look, if it's still Lazarus, you renumber it, it's not, why would you change it?
It'd be one thing. It'd be one thing if you did the Hellboy route, where it was like you kind of had minis, a series
Yeah.
of ongoing minis from the start or something like that. But unless you go that route, which is a very specific route, which I'm surprised more people haven't embraced, it's hard to work. But another question I had, we've talked about this a bit already, is like how it's going to affect the letters column. Like I know that area is expanding. It sounds like you're going to try to bring in some prose stuff. You're going to try to bring in some more of like the artifacts and everything like that.
Yep.
It's now 20 pages long. What's the overall approach on the back matter now? Like, what are you going to do?
We're gonna hopefully be able to expand the letters. We have at this point some regular correspondence, and then every so often we get new correspondence. I want to be able to answer letters in full. The last couple issues, we haven't really been able to talk about the science because we've lost room to story, and story's got to have primacy. So the back matter is what gets cut, right? That's where we buy that space back from when we need to. So that'll be part of it. Is I get to go back and talk about these are the latest things in science that I've found and what I think it means and my very poor, interpretations of the events. We're going to do short fiction. If we can get the short fiction in, and Michael, as the time, will do spot illos for it, which I get really excited about.
Mm-hmm.
The short fiction ideally will be running between 2,000 and 5,000 words, so it'll be a good chunk of short story. And then the goal with that, of course, would be, ideally we get a bunch of different writers to do the short fiction, and then we get to assemble it, and that'll be its own book. We get to put out my long-awaited short story anthology. We're going to add, in support of the RPG, I want to give 1 or 2 pages that'll be to converting something in the story into game mechanics. So either a character who has appeared in the story will be rendered as in a stat block, an NPC, or pieces of equipment or locations. We'll be able to put in some stuff to support Green Ronin in the RPG.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really want to turn Trautmann and Richard Howe loose on artifacts. Richard has joined us as of issue 27, and he is an amazing graphic designer. He did the Bittner recruitment poster on the back of 27,
Mm-hmm.
and the piece on the back of 28. I actually was hesitant enough when they first started throwing it past me that I was like, I better run this past Image and make sure we don't have to, black bag the comic. It's for Vassalovka propaganda.
Mm.
Um, well, it's for what it's for is basically a porn channel.
Oh.
What the channel is it's a Vassalovka propaganda and intelligence vector. And it's in the story in 28, but it's referred to as, in English, people refer to her as Naughty Natasha.
Mm.
So basically the back cover for 28 is a Naughty Natasha ad. And it was like, okay, this has to be subtle enough to convey it, but cannot be so overt as to be like, people can't sell this.
We have to sell it behind the counter with adults only on it.
Exactly. So it isn't that, but just the work that Trautmann and Richard have been doing is phenomenal. And honestly, Richard also has access to an enormous array of assets, aside from his tremendous skill. So in the past, a lot of what Trautmann in particular has been doing with artifacts is limited by what he can get his hands on.
Mm-hmm.
He uses a lot of licensed stock photos, for instance. Well, Richard's got an enormous amount of information to reach out to. I mean, he's got a great library there. So I am optimistic.
Yeah, no, those ads you guys do in the back are some of my favorite random things. My favorite part about it though is the fact that it's kind of a weird favorite part, but one of the things that makes it such a cool thing is the fact that that there's a ton of readers who don't even notice it because it's so seamless. And like
we've had people actually, I think initially people were like, "Why are you running ads?" It's like, we're not. That's not a real ad.
There's gonna be somebody who's way too excited about the Naughty Natasha ad.
Yeah.
I feel like Trautmann is kind of like the super underrated secret superstar of Lazarus. Like,
yes.
What did you say? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like that was one question I had. Is like, what is this book without Eric Trautmann? Like, how can you underline what his impact is on the book?
Yeah, okay, so Eric is how to describe this? He's the engineer.
Mm.
I mean, basically, he's our engineer. He's basically Scotty. So, for instance, there's a sequence that may or may not be in 29 right now. That's a situation room sequence that Michael is not enthusiastic about drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of these sequences where there are going to be monitors and there's going to be all this information on those monitors. Eric provides all that.
Wow.
Right? He builds all that. Not only does he build all that, but say now if we go over to Vassalovka and for any reason we're going to see a Vassalovka interface, Eric will design that as well. And Eric will design that with an eye to the world building. He and I will discuss, for instance, the difference between a Carlisle interface and a Hawk interface. If we ever actually make it to television,
mm-hmm.
right? If we ever actually make a Lazarus TV show, we know how Carlisle interacts with their technology versus how Hawk does.
Right.
Hawk displays are these very brutalistic, vertically built, authoritarian screens, right? Carlisle's are very much dials, right? You spin things and you sweep them. That's the kind of brain work he does.
Right.
Vassalovka soldiers are appearing for the first time in the book in 29. They have to be armed and armored. We have the daggers in operation, and it's been 2 years since we've last seen them, right? It's X-68 when we come back. So we have to make sure everybody's weapons, what are they going to look like? And these are things that Michael enjoys designing to some extent and hates designing to another. So for instance, Michael really seems to get excited when he's designing architecture.
Mm-hmm.
When he's looking at buildings and he's looking at reference or vehicles, he gets excited about that. He has no interest in designing the weaponry, right?
Yeah.
So Eric will go out and he will figure out what does this look like and what is that internal consistency, and then he and will refine it. And then on top of that, he's a great writer. Half of the X66 miniseries was co-written with Eric. And it was co-written with Eric. That's not, him sending me a script and me going, there you go, and I'm just putting my name on it, nor is it me rewriting him top to bottom. These are stories, these are scripts where he and I are in communication, we break it down, we work it together. Mm-hmm. So he is, in many ways, sort of the invisible glue to a lot of what Lazarus is. And then for the rest of the book, he designs, the book design is his going off of Michael's direction. Michael will bring the cover in, Eric will format it, he and Michael will go back and forth on, okay, what's the logo placement, what's the color, what's the highlighting here we want, how, where, what. Casey became a dagger at the end of X66. In X68, we're going to see her as a member of Dagger Alpha. That means she's in her armor. That means her armor has been customized. She's got her operational handle, which is Spitfire. So it's one of those details that I think a lot of people have missed. But for instance, when you see the daggers, each of their helmets is individually personalized. Mm-hmm. So Park, who's the leader of this of Dagger Alpha, right, is call sign's Blue Wolf. So he has had a wolf motif on his helmet. Eric, Michael turned to Eric and said, I need a motif for Spitfire. Mm-hmm. And 45 minutes later, Eric has shot back 2 variations going, what do you think of this or this? We're like, oh, that'll work.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
It reminds me of my wife is an architect, and like they work obviously closely with engineers, and it kind of seems like this is an oversimplification of your roles. But you called him the engineer. It's like you're the architect, he's the engineer, and Michael is like basically. I feel like interior designer is like inaccurately specific, but it kind of in that realm. It's like you guys kind of collectively you're all making this thing real. But if you didn't have Eric, it's almost like. The key to Lazarus working is the world feeling real. He's the person who fills out the details, who makes the whole thing kind of feel authentic. It's like maintains the verisimilitude of the world. Anyways, but so another patron question I had was how will this like format change like affect hardcovers and trades? Because like theoretically, you would now basically be writing a trade's worth in 3 issues, right? Like how does that get impacted?
That's exactly the way it's going to work, is that ideally there will be 1 new trade a year. Mm-hmm. The trade will collect the 3 quarterly issues of the year. Mm-hmm. And 2 trades equal a hardcover. So we intend to continue putting out hardcovers, and we will continue to trade it. And this goes back to the pricing issue. The quarterly issues have to be priced so that we're not pricing people out of the trades, right? If you ask $10 for a 64-page quarterly, and we are not. If you do that, the response is, "But $10 buys me a trade, man. This is less." So we intend to, you're going to get a 128-page trade once a year. Mm-hmm. That should be ideally. And then every 2 years, you should get another hardcover. We actually have to begin work on hardcover 3, which should take Cull and X66 and combine them, though I'm a little hesitant. There's a piece of me that's like, maybe we should do Cull and Fracture 1 One's Fracture, one's completed, and that should be a hardcover. And should we ever do a second mini, we'll put X66 and a second mini series in together. One of the things Michael's been very clear about is he doesn't actually want anybody drawing the main book other than himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see why. That's his baby, and that's where he's put his passion. So if we do another mini, and I'm not opposed to it, and maybe the way to approach this is now me, thinking out loud.
Sure.
Is that when we are in the gap, when we're in the trade gap after the third quarterly issue comes out, that'll be issue 31. Maybe we'll do another mini.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll depend if the series needs the mini at that point. And that's always the primary question. How does it serve, and does it serve? We're going to do the Moray source book next, I think.
Nice.
And hopefully that will be, I don't know, maybe later this year. So
I was curious. I was a big fan of the X66 miniseries. Like, I thought it was fantastic. Like especially the first issue, the issue with the dagger training and everything was incredible. I mean, and it had Steve Lieber, which was amazing.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you, Steve.
But I was curious, like, if this scheduling, if you guys hadn't been sorting out all of this, would X66 have ever even happened? Is this just like a thing that came up because of it, or is this something you kind of always wanted to do?
Oh, I always wanted to do it, but we weren't going to be able to do it.
Right.
Because Michael needs to draw the main series. So if he hadn't taken the break, then we would have just rolled into 29, would have rolled into 2027. We would have just kept moving. Since we got the break, since he came and said, look, I need the time off, and I was like, okay, well, then this is the time to do it. Now we can go in and we can show these things that we wouldn't have been able to show otherwise. We would have had to have just told you it happened.
Right.
So it was, I mean, it is a direct result of the opportunity and seizing it. Like I said, I wanted to do it. But there just was no way to schedule it.
Mm-hmm.
So we got it and we were like, woohoo! Look, well, and I say woohoo, it was I do not begrudge Michael at all taking the time off.
Right.
But him taking the time off meant it was like, okay, well, we got to figure out what we're going to do. And that was the immediate thought, was like, well, this is the opportunity to tell the story that we weren't going to be able to, or tell these stories that there was no room to tell otherwise.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that is definitely a silver lining to it. But that's one thing I'm kind of curious about. Like, I know you're a person who thinks holistically, and I'm kind of curious what your perspective is about like how this fits in the current comic industry, because I don't really think, doing like what you've done, like X+66, and then also switching to the format, doing a format change, would have worked even back when you were doing like Queen and Country, when you started that like back in 2001. Like, I don't know if the marketplace would have like been able to sustain something like that. Do you feel like doing these kinds of things, like, do you feel like the current marketplace and the way readers engage with comics allows for a bit more leeway for creators to try something different like this these days?
I certainly think they do on creator-owned books, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that readers of creator-owned series tend to be, well, they're buying in.
Right.
They're buying into the series, and in so doing, I think they are more inclined to follow the creative team wherever they may go, in service of it. I don't think that's I don't think that's something that should be taken for granted.
Right.
When we were doing Queen and Country, and it's funny that you mentioned it, we did the declassifieds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the declassifieds were very much stories that were not, all but one of them were sort of tangential.
Mm-hmm.
The Crocker one wasn't. The Crocker story was very much a prelude to a chase operation because I wanted to give it historical context.
Mm-hmm.
But prior to that, all the other ones were simply opportunities to tell stories about these characters that we had not seen before.
Right.
And I don't honestly, if you were to ask me how did those do, my answer would be, but that's actually, that probably says more about me. There are a lot of creators, and especially creator-owned creators, who can tell you down to the decimal point what variations have been, from this issue to that, and so on. I'm not interested in doing that much of a deep dive. I don't have the head for it, and more crucially, I don't have the time for it. I know if we're in profit or not. I know if we're not, where we're going to make it up.
Mm-hmm.
I know if the book is solvent. If the book is solvent, then the book can keep going. If the book is keep going, then the book will eventually be in profit.
Mm-hmm.
But I am not and do not make decisions on the basis of how can we wring the most coin out of our audience.
Right.
And as a result, I know we've made some decisions that were not cost effective, for lack of a better phrase. But I like to think that the choices that we do make are always in service to the story we're trying to tell.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to bring up, because I feel that one thing that's really exciting about the way that creator-owned comics are being approached in recent years is, like, you look at something like The Wicked and the Divine, where they do a lot of interesting things with format and story delivery, where they, when they're doing like the gap in between trades and stuff, they'll throw in like a look at the Pantheon back in like 1921 or whenever it was. I'm sure I just upset a Wicked reader because I didn't give the exact date of the Pantheon. Yeah, exactly. But anyways, like they look back at that, or they do like they had that arc where they had like the issue that was all interviews with the gods and things like that. And I think that that's one of the really cool things is the way that the modern relationship with creator-owned books allows for a lot more risk taking when it comes to finding the right fit for your story, even if it isn't the exact fit we're used to. And I think that's really cool because, like, it's funny that I didn't know you guys were making an RPG, or that there is an RPG of Lazarus being made, because that's one of the interesting things about Lazarus is there's so much depth to the world that part of my brain, I feel like, looks at it as like an RPG already, which is weird.
Well, you've got a bunch of, I mean, look, I'm huge nerd gamer.
Yeah.
Trautmann worked for West End Games. That was his first job, and a lot of and I think a lot of my world building is influenced by my experiences playing RPGs growing up. So there is I mean, it's always been a very active. It's always been a very active approach to the world building in that sense. I think the gaming crossover there was inevitable. It was just sort of by the nature of who I was, and growing up and reading all the D&D source books, or name the game, and that absolutely bleeds into how we've built the world in Lazarus. I think for Michael, it's a little bewildering because that's never been a place he's gone. So he's sort of like, what are you doing? I don't understand you guys,
Yeah.
And it was funny when I said, we're going to do an RPG license. He was like, great. When do we get the check? And I laughed at him. I was like, you know nothing about the gaming industry. I think the joke is, how do what's the quickest way to lose $100,000? Start a game company.
Oh my God.
But And it's funny, the Green Ronin source book is a source book. There's nothing in it that isn't canon. So there's a lot of added, and that mattered to me. I didn't want to do an RPG that was going to be, um, if you're playing a game, you have to have the freedom to tell the story you want to tell for that game. Uh, and that means if somebody wants to run a game where, the Carlyles are all wiped out and, they're running a new family that takes over, that's their druthers. But the information that they're working from has to be internally consistent. And to build an RPG, you have to have more. There needed to be more information available to the players and to the GM than you can just glean from reading the series. So the source books are actually, the Lazarus book is actually going to be a huge source of canon information about the other families that we've never been able to talk about or see anything of, because we're primarily focused on Carlisle, and we're always going to be primarily focused on Carlisle. So yeah, if you're a real Lazarus nerd, you want to pick it up, even if you don't game, just because if you're curious how Carragher works, this is how Carragher works. It's in there.
I feel like you guys have some serious, like, there's a lot of fans of comics, obviously, but like the depth that you get. I was reading an interview you did with somebody where you mentioned two readers named Mackenzie and Walker.
Yeah.
And you said that they basically would send you like 5,000 word detailed analyses of like each issue. And like that, I don't imagine like every comic is getting things like that. And I think that's probably speaks to the depth of like thought that people put into this world. It's kind of astonishing, really. But that's
they've done a very deep dive. They write analyses over at NerdSpan, and I don't think they've put up the one for 27, but yeah, they write these 3,000 to 5,000 word. I mean, it's like reading somebody's critical essay, on Of Mice and Men for a college class. It's like, wow, they really go deep.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's like, the English major in me goes, well, if it's there, it's there.
Right.
But there's another part of me that always reads them with a little bit of bewilderment and some bafflement, that it's like, really? That's a lot of work, dude. You went hard. So.
I'm kind of curious. Like, I know this isn't like a favorite child type question, but I mean, it's like, I feel like Lazarus has to take more out of you than your other projects. And that's no statement against Black Magic or like Wonder Woman, Diana's Daughter, or anything like that. But I mean, it's like, there's so much that goes into this world and so much depth of what you have to think out. Does that happen? Is that something does it take more effort and like thought to make something like this happen?
Yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm doing a disservice to any of the other books that I work on, but Lazarus is by far the hardest thing I write consistently. There are times and issues of different things where it's like, okay, this is really biting my ass or whatnot, but Lazarus consistently vexes me. I spend a lot of time going, all right, how do I get myself out of the situation I put myself in? I mean, it's one of the things that's been holding up getting the rest of the script to Michael on 29, which is I boned Carlisle really badly at the end of Cull. I mean, I really screwed them. And now it's 2 years later, and I know what the situation is, and the situation ain't good. And it's like, well, I'm either going to wipe out the family, or they're going to get out of it.
Right.
So then the question becomes, how do you get out of it? And they, your heroes, and I use that word very advisedly in the context of Lazarus, are only as heroic as the obstacles they have to overcome. So, you can't ever make it easy on them. But by the same token, man, it's like, oh Jesus, and you're always playing in the rules that you've created for yourself. I cannot arbitrarily break my rules. I have said that, the families that have a Lazari, they have one, right? There's one op with if you know the series, you know that Carlisle's got their next in development. God knows what else is going on. But, and then people will ask, why is there only one? And it's like, because they are resource intensive as hell. They're very expensive, but the real reason is that their families are terrified of them.
Mm-hmm.
They're terrified of them because if you lose control of your Lazarus, you're fucked.
Yeah.
And the worst thing that could happen to these people, the worst things that could happen to the family would be, if the Lazari all got together one day and said, hey, you know what, we could do a better job running this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what you were talking about with getting all that stuff sorted. Is like, I remember George R. R. Martin had a real issue with like trying to get Daenerys, I think, out of. I don't even know if you read those books or if you watch the show or anything like that. But basically, he had a hard time getting one character out of the situation or the world that she was in, based off of like the way he set up the narrative. It was like he called it the Milanese knot. And it was really fascinating because it's like, we think about it, it's just like, oh, you just move her from one place to another. But it's like, that's not how writing works. And it's like, it's not as simple as that. But I want to ask a deep dive question about like the source books. I was going to ask you a question about how difficult those are to put together. I feel like that's obvious. So I'm going to ask you the level of detail you get into. I remember seeing a picture that you guys had tweeted. I think it was Eric actually had tweeted out about like the map you guys had put together.
Oh yeah, there was an Instagram post a couple years ago when we were doing the first hardcover.
Yeah. And so eventually you guys put together like how the areas are actually distributed. I actually live in Carlisle territory in Anchorage, Alaska.
You're in the Alaskan Expanse.
Yeah, and according to the source book, though, there is a subtle but insistent Vassalovka family influence in the Alaska territory for generations. So I'm curious, like the level of specifics. This is how deep you go. Do you know what my life would be like living in Anchorage, Alaska, or is that just like a level of depth you can't think about?
In Anchorage?
Yeah.
You'd probably be. It's interesting because if you've read up on the Alaskan Expanse area, there's actually a high number of serfs.
Yes.
Per waste, so you'd definitely be serf, though you'd be technically probably engaged in some work for the family that normally would be considered waste. But right now in X68, you've got another problem because Vassalovka's coming your way.
Huzzah!
So you may find yourself conscripted one way or another. It's going to be interesting. Yeah. Wish you luck. I'll let you know.
Thank you.
Once I figure it out, I'll let you know.
I always, I really appreciate it when somehow Alaska makes into comics. It happens in the X-Men a lot. It happened in Kaiju Max, Xander Cannon's comic. There was a big monster fight there, and I'm pretty sure my entire city besides my neighborhood was destroyed. So I actually, the last question, Lazarus related, I want to ask you was, you have a new editor, Alejandro Arbona, is stepping in.
Alejandro just come in, he's terrific. And this was a change made for no reason other really than trying to make my life a little easier, as David Brothers has moved on from Image these days. And Alejandro is also the editor on The Old Guard and Black Magic. So by bringing him in to also edit Lazarus, I now have the same editor on everything I'm doing at Image.
That's nice.
That makes things simple for me. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, that's great. I was just curious about that because I saw him tweet that out, and that's I imagine. I don't know what your relationship with editors are in these books, but I imagine having another person for something that's so big like this would be helpful.
Oh, I love. Look, there are creators who, for whatever reasons, don't want Don't want editorial input. I live and die on editorial input. I need it. I've got to have it. If I don't have it, then I'm in real trouble. And actually, in point of fact, when I get off the phone with you, I'm going to be getting on the phone with Alejandro.
Oh,
I,
nice.
I want somebody, and I've said this in countless interviews. I've never written anything that couldn't benefit from another set of eyes.
Oh yeah.
So having a dedicated set of eyes helps me and gets a better product. If for no other reason I do it just for that. And having somebody who can call you on your bullshit, go like you're cheating there.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to get away with something there, and that's not, you're better than that, or even you may not be better than that, but you can't be allowed to get away with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. There's definitely a lot of different flavors of editors, but I imagine Alejandro's pretty good at like doing that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, and look, a good editor is I've said this many times before as well. Good editor is worth their weight in gold.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot overstate the value of a good editor. You will get a better product, and that's ultimately the goal.
So just a couple more questions. I want to ask a question about your general workload because you have Lazarus. Balancing workloads is really important for creators, especially with all the different things going on in the world. So you have Lazarus, you have Black Magic, you have the Wonder Woman book coming up, you have the Old Guard, you write novels, you probably have other secret things going on. I know there's the Lazarus TV show on Amazon that's in some level of development. How do you balance that kind of workload without losing your mind? Is it really all about schedule management?
Yeah, and sometimes I'm better at it than others. A lot. It's funny because when you're busy, what ends up dictating the schedule more than anything else is deadlines, right? So what has to be in when?
What's the
What
hottest
do I
one?
exactly? What do I have breathing room on, and what do I not? So it's not the ideal way to work, but it becomes the primary director. It's like who needs what. I can't have, I've got artists waiting on me,
Right.
and I can't have them waiting on me because that's how they make their living.
Yeah, you don't want to be the bottleneck.
Exactly. With comics are a train, and every car in the line is contingent on the car ahead of it moving properly. So if I am for whatever reason not delivering, then I'm holding up the whole damn train. So it's always the deadline. That's always the governor, and then it becomes a question of trying to manage the schedule and stay ahead of it. And then as the saying goes, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Something always happens. Somebody needs something. Something comes up, and then we all have lives. So
Right.
there's any number of things. I don't do a lot of novel stuff anymore. I'm hoping to get back to it in the next year or so. Um, but I am doing more Hollywood stuff, and Hollywood schedule is, talk about hurry up and wait. When it's got to be, in, it's got to be in. And when they don't need you, they don't need you,
Yeah.
and you go months, and then all of a sudden you get a call, and they're like, "Hey, no, now," and you're like, "What? What the hell? Yeah, I was here the whole time." So.
Yeah, you can definitely tell who has the power in the relationship there. They're like, you're going to be working purely on our schedule, and you're like, ugh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, but their money spends great. So,
Yes. All right. So just two more questions. I was reading your guys' Reddit AMA you did, you and Michael, and one thing that I thought was really fascinating that you had a question about Renee Montoya, and it led into you talking about how you weren't sure you would be the best fit for Kate Canning because her story has changed so wildly. But one thing I was really curious about is like it seems like you're a person who gets very invested in your characters, and that's easy to understand why. But like when it comes to characters like Wonder Woman and Kate Kane and Renee Montoya, like how does your relationship change with them after you leave the title? Like do you almost like check in on them after you leave, like they're like a an ex or something like that, or is it different?
Sometimes it depends on the character. When I left Kate under such a cloud, and the relationship, that the change in what happened there, with Jim and Hayden, made it. I tried reading the book and I couldn't, and they did things that I absolutely 100% wouldn't have done, and made choices that I absolutely 100% had said I wouldn't make. They did things with the character there that Jim knew. I was like, that was the thing that we were never going to do. And I tried reading it, and I was just like, I can't. It was too painful. And that was really influenced strongly by also the way that I had left DC, because I had left DC under a huge cloud. So, and with Renee, frankly, a lot of people don't use her.
Right. So it's hard to check in on her if she's not appearing.
They and then they retconned everything, or whatnot. So it's like, well, then that's not Renee, or that's not my Renee.
Right.
And that's, so it wasn't really an issue of checking in, as being like, shrug. And with Diana, everybody's got their take, so you never know what you're going to get at any given moment.
Right.
And so I tend to pick up, with Wonder Woman, I tend to pick up whoever's writing it, and it becomes very case by case for me. It's like, am I enjoying it? Does this work or not? And when I say does this work or not, I'm saying, does this work for me or not? My problem is, I'm a highly opinionated guy. I've got my take on these things. So I tend to avoid putting myself in positions where I'm going to be criticizing my peers.
Right.
Legitimately or otherwise, just because it's rude, if nothing else. When it's a work for hire character, they're not yours, and that's the thing you're constantly reminding yourself of. They're not yours. They're the company's. The company gets to decide what they want to do with them. So
I feel like, as far as characters go, like I also feel like Diana is a character that has like one of the wider spectrums of how like she's approached.
Absolutely.
And it's really interesting because it's such a core character, but like the variance from creator to creator is like just astonishing. Even in short periods of time, it's always really fascinating to me, because it's like, I remember there was a stretch after after Infinite Crisis where it felt like there was five dramatically different takes over like 5 consecutive creative teams, and like there was very little consistency. It was very odd, but
yeah. And I think to an extent that was DC trying to figure out something that would work. Will this stick?
Yeah. So I want to close with a lighter topic. It should be quick. Okay. We're both soccer fans.
Yes.
I think you're more of a fan, especially because you actually like have a team that you can track.
Yeah.
I mostly follow European soccer, to be honest, which is extremely hard to do from Alaska because all the games are on it like at 6 a.m. So that said, 2018 brings a big event. It's the World Cup, one that's missing the U.S. squad entirely. Twofold question. Are you excited for it despite the lack of an American squad? And if so, do you have a country you're pulling for?
That's an interesting question. I am going to watch, and I will undoubtedly become excited. America's participation in it is not actually my problem, or lack thereof. My problem is Russia. My problem is it being held in Russia, and everything that comes from that, and my disgust with the rampant FIFA corruption and the collusion going on there. That's honestly the biggest factor for me. But I'll end up watching because I love it, and I'll end up screaming at Alexi Lalas because I want to shut up on Fox. And, I'll probably end up watching a lot of the games mostly muted.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm pulling for anybody right now. I'm always pulling for England on some level, just because they're always, their capacity to snatch, defeat from the jaws of victory will never cease to amaze me.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what happens with this squad. I think I would like to. Costa Rica really impressed me last time, and I'm curious how they're going to do this time.
Yeah.
And look, I always like in watching Germany play.
Yeah.
I'm going to look forward to seeing France play. And I suspect I'll be rooting for a lot of underdogs that'll get wiped out of the group stages. So, that's the way it goes. So, yeah.
I always find myself rooting for England, too, because it's like they're the obvious... They should be the favorite, but for some reason they always put themselves in a position to be the underdog. And it's such a fascinating thing. Like, I don't know why they're never as good as they should be, but I don't know. I like a lot of their players. Like, I've ever since I saw them, and I think it was like either 2010 or 2014 World Cup. I really like Raheem Sterling.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. And actually there's this one dude who's on Tottenham Hotspur who's on South Korea. His name's like Son Heung-min. And he is fantastic. Like, I love watching him play.
And I'll tell you something. I'm really I'll be watching Egypt.
Oh,
just because I'm a Liverpool guy and I like Mo Salah a lot.
He's
and
good.
I am hoping for him great things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, I'm there with you though. It is such a fascinating event this year, just because of like FIFA's obvious like insanity and corruption, and like the fact that it's taking place in Russia is like makes it maybe one of the most loaded theoretical sports events you could ever actually have happen. But at the same time, it's just like I love the World Cup. Like, some of my favorite sporting experiences have been like going to watch, because it's taking place at crazy hours in Alaska, like going to a bar to watch it at 6 in the morning and eating biscuits and gravy as I watch, I don't know, like Arjen Robben do something crazy. Although it makes me sad that Netherlands aren't in it this year, because I love watching the Netherlands play. But anyways, no, it should be fun. But Greg, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me.
Yeah, you know where I am if there's anything I can do or any follow-ups you might have, okay?
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Greg Rucka. You can find him on Twitter at RuckaWriter, and his work in Lazarus and Black Magic at Image Comics. If you're a fan of the show, check it out on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. If you back it on there, you not only support the show, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher, and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find the show on social media as well. Like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Michael Garland, Mabrind, Nick, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, David, Jason Massey, Mike Gillis, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Guarino, Dan Lee, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruta Batista, Abraham Reisman, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Ely, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Keslick, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Bullmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen, as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.